All right. Welcome to the first mini lecture for Ancient Egypt, the first screencast lecture. And just note that when we don't have in-person class sessions with Echo 360 in a couple of weeks when I'm going to be gone, this is how I will present new information. And I hope to do that with a combination of Teams meetings, one of which we are having this Friday. So I guess this is an unplanned kind of practice at using some of these other mediums here. All of this information is coming from Canvas as we switch to Ancient Egypt. And here we really are going to be focusing on, as the overview says, the funerary art and architecture. We know so much about ancient Egypt through, for example, the grave goods found in tombs in places like the Great Pyramids. Don't worry about this quiz information. This is what we're going to talk about on Friday, okay? So don't stress. I'm going to just continue here. And when we look at, this is a map of ancient Egypt, the main defining feature, of course, here is the Nile. The Nile is the only water source in the region, here marked on the map. And it flows from south to north, and then it kind of at its mouth, when it flows out into the Mediterranean, it forms this big massive delta. It is in Egyptian civilization is entirely dependent on it, and there's these annual cycles of flooding that provide rich soil for agriculture. Religion and divine kingship are very important to the art and architecture that we will investigate. The kings, or who are later called the pharaohs, they are worshipped as the link to the god and the gods. And the king had temples to the gods built, statues of the gods commissioned. Priest, a kind of priestly class, was important in maintaining this larger structure. And the time period we're looking at is roughly contemporary with ancient Mesopotamia. So the chapter, the module that we just covered. All right, let's start with the palette of King Narmer. That is one of the most important works that we're going to investigate. It really, ancient Egypt is divided up into the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom. We're going to look at examples of works from the Old and New Kingdoms, but this is really right at the cusp, almost predating the Old Kingdom. It's made of stone, of slate, and is about 2 feet high. And we're looking at one side here on the left and the other side of the same object on the right. And so you can see it is relief sculpture, sculpture that's carved into the surface of the stone itself. It's a ceremonial version of a utilitarian object. These palettes, you can see that there is a small indentation between these two long-necked felines here on the one side. That indentation would be used to mix up makeup. Think about the kind of pop culture images of ancient Egypt we have. Elizabeth Taylor playing Cleopatra, and, you know, the like. That big heavy eyeliner, that is actually historically accurate. The Egyptians wore eye makeup to protect their eyes from the powerful sun. And this palette is important because it depicts the unification of Egypt, which is an event that happens over centuries to solidify then this progression of kingdoms. What we have here on side A is Horus, this hawk god. He holds a rope in his human hand that is tied around this head here that is coming out of papyrus stalks. Papyrus is an important Nile River plant that grows in the lower Nile region. And remember, the lower river is actually northern Egypt. the bottom here, we see two defeated foes lying dead. We also have the same scene being played out here with a larger figure, this hierarchical scale of the larger figure holding this other figure captive. Remember, the use of hierarchical scale is to signify importance. And we also see this little servant figure behind that large king figure who's holding his sandals, also to enunciate his status. On the other side, we see those two long-necked felines that have those intertwining necks that represent the unified Egypt. And so we see here the defeat of Lower Egypt by Upper Egypt that leads to unification. The Old Kingdom is an era of approximately 2700 BCE to 2190 BCE. And this is a time, an extremely prosperous time of social cohesion and political unity. This is the era of the Great Pyramids, this monumental funerary architecture. And the central belief of Egyptian religion is a concept known as the Ka. The Ka is the inner life force or spirit which lives on after a person's physical death. And some people would call that a soul today. The Ka needed a well-preserved and well-maintained body to live in, as well as a comfortable home for this afterlife. And that home needed to be equipped with all of the necessities of normal life: food, bed, furniture. And in case the body is stolen, there needs to be other statues, other portraits made of the deceased for extra insurance. And so, of course, this is where the process of mummification comes from, the idea of the Ka needing a well-preserved, well-maintained body to reside in the afterlife. And when you are building entire homes for the deceased, you need large, special funerary architecture. And that develops directly out of that religious belief to fulfill the requirements of the Ka. The earliest funerary architecture is what is known as the mastaba, and we're looking at some diagrams of the mastabas, of early mastabas. They are one-story buildings, flat-topped, that hold an underground burial chamber. So if you look at the cross-section here on the right, you can see this vertical shaft that goes into the underground burial chamber. The chamber itself is not in the building. And that lower burial chamber is a small sealed room housing the Ka statue and all sorts of other grave goods. This is the basis for the Great Pyramids. Oh, and I'm getting ahead of myself because I want to talk about the stepped pyramids first. Look at how this early Old Kingdom step pyramid is actually kind of, it's almost like nesting mastabas. One mastaba stacked on top of each other to form these 5 layers. Each side of Amenhotep's stepped pyramid in Dosir, is aligned perfectly with a cardinal direction, and archaeological excavations reveal it's part of a much larger complex. So it's not just the step pyramid itself, but we see this large enclosure with protected walls and restricted access. In fact, the Egyptians, grave robbing is not just a problem in the modern era, but the Egyptians, they tried to lead thieves in their own time, kind of deter them. And so many of these structures are actually dummy structures. They're just filled with rubble, but it's to kind of, it's to protect the actual structures from thieves themselves. Okay. I want to keep this short. Each of these mini lectures are going to be about 10 minutes. So then when we come back to the next to video 2, we will, in fact, go to the Great Pyramids of Giza, the pyramids that we are all familiar with today.